There is a condition that affects the majority of adults over 50, contributes directly to cold feet, heavy legs, and sluggish circulation, and is almost never discussed in a doctor's office. Not because it is rare, because it looks too ordinary to investigate. It is mild chronic dehydration. When the body is even slightly underhydrated, blood becomes measurably thicker. The medical term is increased viscosity, meaning the blood does not flow as freely through the vessels as it should. In the large arteries, the heart compensates without much difficulty. But in the smaller vessels of the lower legs, the ones that were already working against gravity to return blood upward, thicker blood moves sluggishly, pools more readily, and delivers less oxygen to the tissue it is supposed to be feeding. The result is exactly what many people over 50 describe and attribute to age. Legs that feel heavy by afternoon, feet that are inexplicably cold, mild swelling around the ankles that appears without obvious cause. The Greek and Southern Italian approach to this problem is older than modern medicine and considerably more practical. In the villages of Crete and Calabria, daily life has long included a rotation of specific drinks, herbal teas, fermented preparations, spiced warm beverages, consumed not for pleasure alone, but for what generations of practice established they did to the body. Modern vascular research has since identified the compounds responsible and confirmed the mechanisms with precision. This video promises the drinks work fast, and that framing is accurate. Several of the compounds on this list produce measurable vasodilation, the widening of blood vessels, within 30 to 60 minutes of consumption. Others work cumulatively, changing the internal environment of the vessels over days and weeks. The final drink, number 1, is supported by flavanol research that produced results specific enough to surprise the cardiologists reviewing it. I will come back to that at the end. First, leave a comment with your age and where in the world you are watching from. I read everyone, and let's count down from 10. Number 10, water. Before any compound, any herb, or any concentrated juice can do its work on the vessels in your legs, the most fundamental variable has to be addressed. Blood that is thick from dehydration will not respond well to vasodilators. You cannot widen a pipe and expect improved flow if what is moving through it is the consistency of syrup. The target for adults over 50 is between 6 and 8 glasses of water daily, roughly 1.5 to 2 liters. That number is not new information. What most people do not know is that the thirst mechanism weakens significantly with age. By the time you feel thirsty past 50, you are already meaningfully dehydrated. Thirst is no longer a reliable signal. It has to be replaced with a schedule. Drink a full glass of water within 15 minutes of waking, before coffee, before breakfast. The body loses fluid overnight through respiration and has been without water for 7 or 8 hours. Rehydrating first thing reduces morning blood viscosity noticeably, and many people report that the leg heaviness they attributed to poor sleep improves significantly once this single habit is consistent. Keep a glass beside your chair during the day. Do not wait to feel thirsty. The signal has stopped being accurate. Water sets the baseline. Everything that follows works more effectively because of it. Number 9, green tea. In the Okinawan tradition, and Okinawa consistently produces some of the highest concentrations of healthy adults over 80 anywhere on Earth. Green tea is not a morning ritual in the way coffee is in the West. It is consumed throughout the day in small amounts, kept warm and returned to repeatedly. The Okinawan term nuchi gusui translates loosely as food as medicine, and green tea sits at the center of that philosophy not for its caffeine content, but for a class of compounds called catechins, particularly one called EGCG, epigallocatechin gallate. EGCG stimulates the inner lining of blood vessels, the endothelium, to produce nitric oxide, the compound that signals smooth muscle and vessel walls to relax and widen. This is the same mechanism that several classes of cardiovascular medication attempt to replicate. In the legs specifically, where the vessels are working hardest against gravity, increased nitric oxide production means measurably better flow within an hour of consumption, 1 to 3 cups daily is the functional range. Brew it at a temperature just below boiling, around 80 to 85 degrees Celsius, for 2 to 3 minutes. Boiling water degrades the catechins. Loose leaf retains more of the active compounds than most bagged varieties. If caffeine is a concern in the evening, a single morning cup captures a significant portion of the daily benefit. Green tea raises nitric oxide through the endothelium. The next drink takes a more direct route to the same destination, bypassing the vessel lining entirely and delivering the raw material for nitric oxide production straight to the bloodstream. Number 8. Beetroot juice. Rehabilitation dietitians working with older adults in cardiovascular recovery programs have observed something consistent enough to become clinical practice. Patients who added beetroot juice to their daily intake reported reduced leg fatigue and improved walking tolerance earlier in their recovery than those who did not, independent of their exercise compliance. That observation prompted researchers to look more closely at the mechanism, and what they found was precise enough to be useful. Beetroot is exceptionally high in dietary nitrates. When you consume them, bacteria in the mouth and gut convert those nitrates into nitrites, and the body then converts nitrites into nitric oxide directly in the bloodstream without requiring the endothelium to produce it. For older adults whose vessel lining has lost some of its responsiveness over time, this bypass route is particularly valuable. The nitric oxide arrives regardless of how well the vessel walls are functioning. 200 to 250 milliliters, roughly a small glass, consumed 60 to 90 minutes before activity produces peak nitric oxide levels that coincide with when the legs are working. Commercially prepared beetroot shots are a practical alternative if the full juice volume is unappealing. Note that beetroot will temporarily color urine and stools pink or red. This is harmless and expected. Anyone managing kidney stones should consult their physician before adding it regularly, as it is high in oxalates. Beetroot delivers the raw material for nitric oxide through dietary conversion. Pomegranate works through an entirely different mechanism, not by adding to the system, but by removing something that is restricting it. Number 7. Pomegranate juice. The body produces an enzyme called ACE, angiotensin-converting enzyme, whose role is to regulate blood pressure by causing vessels to constrict. In a healthy, balanced system, this is useful. In an older adult with already reduced peripheral circulation, chronically elevated ACE activity means the small vessels in the legs are under a constant low-level constriction signal they do not need. Pomegranate juice contains punicalagins, antioxidant compounds that inhibit ACE activity naturally, reducing that constriction signal and allowing the peripheral vessels to open more freely. 150 milliliters daily is a sufficient dose, a small glass, consumed consistently rather than in large occasional amounts. Choose unsweetened varieties. The added sugar in sweetened pomegranate drinks offsets the vascular benefit by promoting inflammation in the vessel walls. If you find the flavor sharp, diluting it with an equal volume of water loses none of the active compounds. The distinction between beetroot and pomegranate is worth holding on to. Beetroot increases the vasodilating signal. Pomegranate reduces the constricting one. They are not doing the same thing. Used together, they address the same outcome from opposite directions. Both of those drinks work at the level of the vessel wall. The next one works at the level of the blood itself, targeting how readily its cells clump together, which is a separate and equally important variable in how freely circulation moves through the smaller vessels of the lower leg. Number 6. Ginger tea. For most of the 20th century, ginger was categorized by Western medicine as a digestive aid and little else. The circulatory research simply was not being done, in part because there was no pharmaceutical incentive to do it, and in part because the mechanisms were not yet well understood. Traditional Ayurvedic and Chinese medicine had been using ginger specifically for cold extremities and sluggish peripheral circulation for over 2,000 years, not as a metaphor for warming the body, but as a precise clinical observation that it improved blood flow to the hands and feet. When researchers eventually examined the mechanism, They found that gingerols, the active compounds in fresh ginger, inhibit platelet aggregation, meaning they reduce the tendency of blood cells to clump together unnecessarily. Thinner, more freely moving blood reaches the small distal vessels of the feet and lower legs more effectively. Simmer 2 to 3 slices of fresh ginger root in 2 cups of water for 10 minutes. Strain and drink warm once or twice daily. Dried ginger powder, half a teaspoon stirred into hot water, is an adequate substitute. Ginger has a mild blood-thinning effect. Anyone already taking anticoagulant medication such as warfarin should consult their physician before adding it as a daily drink. Number 5. Cayenne pepper drink. Ginger reduces platelet clumping in the blood. Cayenne works through a completely different mechanism, not on the blood itself, but directly on the walls of the vessels. Cayenne contains capsaicin, the compound responsible for its heat. When capsaicin is consumed, it binds to specific receptors, called TRPV1 receptors, found on the smooth muscle cells lining blood vessel walls. That binding triggers an immediate release of a neuropeptide called substance P, which signals the smooth muscle to relax. The vessel widens. This is not an indirect effect mediated by enzymes or conversion pathways. It is a direct, receptor-level vasodilation that begins within minutes of consumption and is particularly pronounced in the peripheral vessels of the lower limbs. Add a quarter teaspoon of cayenne pepper to a glass of warm water with a small squeeze of lemon. Drink it once daily, preferably in the morning. Start with less if you are sensitive to heat and build up gradually. Do not exceed half a teaspoon daily. Anyone with a history of acid reflux or gastric irritation should approach cayenne cautiously. The same mechanism that dilates blood vessels can also irritate an already sensitive stomach lining. Number 4. Olive leaf tea. Along the coastlines of southern Greece and Calabria in Italy, olive trees have been harvested for oil for millennia, but the leaves were never discarded. Village healers prepared infusions from dried olive leaves and administered them specifically to older adults with cold extremities, elevated blood pressure, and poor peripheral circulation. This was not guesswork. The practice was refined over generations of observation, passed down through families in the same communities that consistently produce unusually healthy populations into very old age. The active compound is oleuropein. It works by interfering with the calcium channels in the smooth muscle cells of vessel walls, the same mechanism targeted by a class of prescription blood pressure medications called calcium channel blockers. When calcium entry into those cells is reduced, the muscle relaxes and the vessel opens. Unlike pharmaceutical calcium channel blockers, olive leaf tea produces this effect gently and without the side effect profile of the medication. The effect is most pronounced in the smaller peripheral vessels, precisely the ones serving the lower legs and feet. Steep 1 to 2 teaspoons of dried olive leaves in hot water for 10 minutes. 1 to 2 cups daily is the functional dose. Olive leaf supplements are also widely available in capsule form for those who find the flavor too bitter. Number 3. Turmeric milk. Clinical nutritionists working with older adults in inflammatory conditions, arthritis, metabolic syndrome, early cardiovascular disease, have observed consistently that patients who maintain a daily curcumin intake report improved warmth and sensation in their lower legs over a period of several weeks. The mechanism is distinct from olive leaf tea, and the distinction matters. Oleuropein directly relaxes vessel smooth muscle. Curcumin, the active compound in turmeric, does not dilate vessels directly. What it does is reduce the chronic low-grade inflammation that stiffens vessel walls over time. Inflamed vessels lose elasticity. They cannot expand and contract freely in response to changing blood flow demands. Curcumin suppresses the inflammatory signaling molecules, particularly NF-κB and certain prostaglandins, that drive that stiffening process. The result is not immediate vasodilation, but a gradual restoration of the vessel's own capacity to dilate when needed. Warm 1 cup of milk, dairy or plant-based, and stir in half a teaspoon of turmeric powder, a small pinch of black pepper, and a quarter teaspoon of cinnamon. The black pepper is not optional. It contains piperine, which increases the body's absorption of curcumin by up to 20 times. Without it, most of the curcumin passes through unabsorbed. 1 cup daily, consistently over several weeks, is where the benefit accumulates. Number 2, tart cherry juice. Tart cherries, the Montmorency variety specifically, are among the highest dietary sources of anthocyanins, the pigment compounds that give them their deep red color. Anthocyanins work on blood vessels through a mechanism that complements everything else on this list. They stimulate the endothelium, the vessel lining, to increase production of nitric oxide while simultaneously reducing oxidative stress in the vessel wall itself. Oxidative stress, the cellular equivalent of rust, degrades the endothelium's ability to respond to nitric oxide signals over time. Anthocyanins address both the production side and the degradation side simultaneously. 200 milliliters of unsweetened tart cherry juice daily is the studied dose. It is tart enough that some people prefer to dilute it slightly with water. Tart cherry juice also has well-documented effects on sleep quality and inflammation in joint tissue. For an older adult managing both circulation concerns and disrupted sleep, this is one of the more efficient additions to a daily routine. Choose tart cherry specifically. Sweet cherry juice does not contain the same concentration of active compounds. Number 1, unsweetened cacao drink. At the beginning of this video, I mentioned flavanol research that produced results specific enough to surprise the cardiologists reviewing it. Before I give you those results, I want to give you the mechanism, because the mechanism is what makes the finding credible rather than sensational. Every drink on this list has worked on circulation in one of 3 ways: reducing blood viscosity, delivering raw material for nitric oxide production, or reducing the inflammation and constriction that prevent vessels from opening freely. The cacao drink works through a 4th pathway that none of the others use, and it is the most direct of all. Cocoa is exceptionally rich in a compound called epicatechin, a flavanol that survives digestion, crosses into the bloodstream intact, and reaches the endothelium, the cellular lining of blood vessel walls, where it activates an enzyme called eNOS, endothelial nitric oxide synthase. That enzyme's sole function is to produce nitric oxide from the vessel wall itself. What epicatechin does is essentially switch that enzyme on at a higher setting. The result is a sustained endothelium-generated release of nitric oxide that is more potent and longer lasting than the nitric oxide produced through dietary nitrate conversion, the pathway used by beetroot and green tea. This is not a more roundabout route to the same destination. It is a more powerful activation of the body's own production system. When researchers began measuring the effect of high flavanol cocoa on flow-mediated dilation, a clinical test that measures how well an artery expands in response to increased blood flow, used as a direct assessment of endothelial health, the results were consistent enough across multiple independent trials to prompt serious attention. High flavanol cocoa produced improvements in flow-mediated dilation comparable to those achieved through structured exercise programs and certain classes of cardiovascular medication. The cardiologists reviewing the data were not surprised that cocoa had vascular effects. They were surprised by the magnitude. One research team noted that no other single dietary intervention they had studied produced endothelial improvements of that scale within 2 hours of consumption. 2 hours, a single drink. Here is how to prepare it correctly, because preparation is where most people lose the benefit entirely. Use pure unsweetened cacao powder, not hot chocolate mix, not Dutch processed cocoa. Dutch processing uses an alkalizing agent that destroys the majority of the flavanols. The label should say natural or raw cacao. Stir 1 to 2 tablespoons into warm, not boiling, water or plant-based milk. Add a small amount of honey or cinnamon if needed for palatability. Consume it once daily, ideally in the morning or early afternoon. Avoid adding large amounts of dairy milk, as the proteins in dairy have been shown to bind to flavonols and reduce their absorption. If you are managing a heart condition or taking blood pressure medication, mention this addition to your physician. Not because it is harmful, but because its effects on blood pressure and vessel function are genuine enough to be relevant to any existing treatment plan. Now, a summary of everything we covered today in plain terms. Water reduces blood viscosity so every other compound on this list can do its job. Green tea stimulates the vessel lining to produce its own nitric oxide. Beetroot delivers the raw material for nitric oxide production directly through the bloodstream. Pomegranate reduces the enzyme that signals vessels to constrict. Ginger reduces the tendency of blood cells to clump together unnecessarily. Cayenne binds directly to vessel wall receptors and triggers immediate relaxation. Olive leaf tea interferes with the calcium signals that keep vessels tight. Turmeric milk reduces the chronic inflammation that has been stiffening vessel walls for years. Tart cherry juice addresses both nitric oxide production and the oxidative damage that degrades it. And unsweetened cacao activates the body's own nitric oxide engine at the vessel wall, more directly and more powerfully than any other food compound currently studied. Full preparation details and daily doses for every drink are written out in the description below this video. You do not need to add all 10 at once. Start with 2 or 3 that fit naturally into what you already do each day, and build from there.